A lot of people will tell you that the key to speaking clearly is to stop rushing and slow down. And while there's some truth to that, I've found that it doesn't really address any of the three root issues that I faced. And it's also just hard to apply in practice. So here are 5 rules that I actually use that will help you articulate your thoughts crystal clear. Number 1, make eye contact. You see, when you're talking to someone and you're a little bit too close, it's kind of like hard to think clearly, you know? Like if I'm up in your face like this, like nodding away and like listening when you're talking, it's a bit hard to think. And it's a bit hard, especially to lock eyes with them and think. But if you take a step back to about like this distance, it's a lot easier now. It's a lot more comfortable. If you go back further, like here, it's even easier. So you want to find the Goldilocks zone where you're close enough to hear people and connect with people, but not so close that it's just distracting and you lose your train of thought. So I found that when I have a bit of distance, I'm able to actually make eye contact with the other person better. I'm not darting my eyes around, which makes me come across as more confident. You know, my point is stronger. And it also helps me say my points more articulately as well. So make sure you have the right distance from the person and then just make eye contact with them. And if you're still struggling to make good eye contact with people, you can try the triangle technique where you look like eye, nose, eye, and like move around rather than just staring into their soul. Number 2, don't be afraid of disagreeing with people. So I used to be one of those people where I would say like, oh, I don't really think, I don't know, blue is the best color. And then someone else would be like, oh really, I think blue is a good color. And then I'd be like, you know what, like fair enough, blue is, I can see why you like it, blue's pretty good. And then they'd be like, oh, well, why don't you like blue? And I'd be like, oh, I don't really know, you know, like, I guess you're right. I'd be one of those annoying people who doesn't stand his own ground. So having a fear of disagreeing with people and having your own opinion is gonna absolutely ruin your articulation, because you're gonna start, like in my experience, you're gonna start stumbling over your words because you'll be rushing to explain yourself. Whereas if you are not scared of disagreeing with people and being judged, then if people disagree with you and they're like, what? You're not going to be like, oh no, and rush to explain yourself. You're going to explain yourself in a slower, more articulate way. And the way you avoid scrambling to explain yourself when you disagree is that you just remember that disagreement fosters connection. So whenever you disagree with someone, you should feel happy in a way because that's an opportunity to connect. Number 3, pause and think before you speak. You can use words like, hold on, let me think about how to say this and stuff like that. I use that quite commonly. Now, this is what I said at the start of like, don't just talk slower or slow down, stop rushing. It is actually pretty helpful to stop rushing, but as you've seen from the 2 above points, stopping rushing on its own, like saying that, isn't very helpful. So the tip I'm going to give here about stopping before you speak, I'm going to tell you how to actually do it, and I'm going to help you solve the underlying reason behind that, I think, because that's what I've had to do. So hopefully it will help you. So obviously when you're rushing too much, you don't have time to think about what to say, and so your thoughts come out jumbled, and you end up worse off than if you'd pause for a little bit, and people will be patient, by the way, if you do that, and then explains your point more clearly. So you probably know that, but I just had to explain that. But the way you actually stop yourself from explaining your point too quickly and you actually successfully slow down is you have to address the underlying root causes. So one of them is that you think that people are not, you know, they're not going to keep listening if you pause for ages, or that you're going to somehow seem less articulate and less, you know, you've thought out your point less. But in reality, as we've said, like if you pause but then deliver a really good point, that's a better option than if you just deliver a really messy point. So you're going to actually come across better. And then people will actually pause if you say, hold on, let me think about how to say this, because they should be grabbed in by the curiosity of what you've said. So you said kind of like a lead-in statement, and then you're going to explain yourself. If you're going to explain yourself, people are already hooked by the lead-in statement. So they're going to, you know, accept a little bit of a pause there. And if they don't, then it wasn't necessary for you to explain yourself anyway. And then the other root issue that will cause you to speak too fast and to not just slow down and take your time is that you're not comfortable sharing your opinions. You're not comfortable just in conversation being yourself in a way. Ultimately, like most of communication skills, and I know this comes down to fear of judgment, because I used to have absolutely terrible fear of judgment, and it just ruins everything. You can't say anything, you can't do anything if you're constantly fearing judgment. Even if it's just a tiny bit. You may not have this massive fear of judgment. If there's a tiny bit there, it's going to affect your articulation. And the way you remove that fear of judgment is you think about all the reasons why you might not be okay with sharing your opinions, why you might not be okay with pausing and all this stuff. And all the reasons that come up about why, you think, is there any evidence for any of these? So maybe something will come up like, oh, if I pause, like people aren't going to keep listening. Do you have any evidence that when you've paused, people have stopped listening? Likewise, if it's like something comes up, like one for me would be like, oh, like, I think I'm talking too much. Do you have any evidence that you're talking too much? Because in my case, I wasn't talking enough. So like when you talk, are people going like, they're like yawning, and they like trying to end the conversation? If you don't have that evidence, then your brain is probably just exaggerating the outcomes. Your perception is skewed, and that's what leads to this over, massive fear of judgment monster, when it should really be a small fear of judgment monster. And if you do have evidence that people are actually not liking you and something like they're yawning when you speak, do you actually really care about that? Like for the yawning when they speak, you probably should, but there's some outcomes where like a disagreement, for example, if you disagree with someone, that's not really a negative outcome, is there? So some negative outcomes, you're blowing them out of proportion, and some negative outcomes aren't actually negative outcomes. And when you realize that, you become much more able to say what you want in conversation, and therefore speak more articulately. And you can just try voicing your true opinion once. You can try pausing and thinking about what to say just once. See how it goes. You may find that it works out quite well, and you'll have more confidence to do it again. So that should have helped you be more comfortable with slowing down and pausing before you say something. So number 4 then is, instead of using vague words, it's often better to pause and think of the right word. So again, like this one, number 4, 3, 4, and 5, they all come down to this fear of judgment thing, and they're being comfortable with pausing and taking your time. So if you're rushing because you're worried that people are, judging you too much, you're on the spot, then you're gonna not think of the right words. So right now, I just took a bit to say that sentence, right? It didn't come out straight away because I was thinking of the word to say. But if you feel like you have to say something, you can't pause at all. You're going to chuck in filler words. You're not going to think of the right words. So maybe not perfect. A lot of the time I had this issue where like I would just explain my point way too quickly, and I wouldn't be able to think of half the words in the sentence, and then the sentence would end up being something like, so that like thingy, well, it actually did this thingy the other day, I can't remember when. And I was like, that sentence contained no information whatsoever, and people would just look at me like, what? And so to come across clearly, you have to actually think out your words that you're going to say. And to do that, you need to pause, like I did in that sentence just before. Just pause for a tiny little bit, and you have to be comfortable with that. The last mistake is explaining your point too briefly. So if you explain your point too briefly, because again, you don't feel comfortable taking your time, it's not going to be very articulated well. So if you, I would also do this, someone will ask my opinion on something, and I'd give like a 1 or 2 sentence summary, and that oversimplifies it so much that it makes no sense. It seems kind of a bit silly. And maybe people will be lucky and they'll ask me to elaborate, and then I'll elaborate. But sometimes they'll just be like, I don't know about that one, Chief. And so taking your time to explain your point and give it its proper justice often helps you come across as more articulate. And if you're worried you're yapping too much, maybe just spam a bunch of questions. And then after you've done that, then you've built up permission to explain your point and yap a bit more. So the key to articulating clearly really comes down to being comfortable articulating clearly, which requires a bit of time and a bit of thought. And it requires not having a fear of the other person judging you or anything like that. It also requires, as we said at the start, a bit of space. So it's an oversimplification, of course, to just go like, you just need to make yourself slow down, because it's not too helpful. Instead, try and apply the stuff I've said in this video. You're thinking through like, why is this actually bad, like what's my fear, and you're working through the fear. And then when you're actually there, remember, disagreements are good, so you feel joy when you disagree, and that gives you the permission to slow down. Remember to give yourself a bit of space. And those tips, and do the triangle technique, and those tips will help you feel way more comfortable, which will allow you to articulate clearly. So the only question left is, are you willing to do the work to become comfortable speaking and sharing yourself? I hope this helped. Have a great day.